Yvonne, there's a lot of other things happening today. Obviously, there's a ton happening. One of the things is the Republican leadership going to the White House. This is the Majority Leader John Thune and the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. What's that meeting going to entail?
It's going to be imperative for both of those men to not only have that direct line of communication with President Trump, but also to get assurance from him as to the priorities that he has legislatively, the order in which those priorities are, sought after and focused on up on Capitol Hill. Because if you look back to just last month during the transition period, of course, Donald Trump was at the Army-Navy football game with John Thune and with Speaker Johnson, and just 2 days later, Elon Musk and then President-elect Trump blew up the continuing resolution, that short-term spending deal to keep the government budget ongoing. And when you look just in the last couple of weeks, there was also discrepancy over whether in 2025, up on Capitol Hill, Republicans would seek to go forward with one major legislative package that was full of tax cut extensions and energy priorities and immigration, or go with a two-bill option. And that's where Donald Trump has sort of wavered between both of those and left Senate and House Republicans on edge and questioning about the direction here to kick off this new session. And so for Donald Trump, this is the opportunity now that he is in office to sit down with both of these men. Just yesterday, he acknowledged there at the Capitol, with Speaker Johnson standing by his side, that the House Republican leader has a very narrow margin. And as he joked, he said he only made it more difficult for him by nominating 3 House Republicans and making this a razor-thin majority for House Republicans. So for Donald Trump, this is really key here, but also for those two men up on Capitol Hill to have an understanding of what the priorities coming out of the White House are.
I wonder, though, Vaughn, is it a two-way street here? Is this Donald Trump telling Thune and Johnson what he wants? Are Thune and Johnson going to the president and saying, here's what we need? Or is it just Donald Trump's agenda right now?
I think it's a very good question. I think that Donald Trump potentially will be the best one to be able to answer that, because in the case of Mike Turner, who was the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, it was Speaker Mike Johnson that made the move to push him off of the committee and suggested that it was his decision to do so. At the same time, we are well aware that now President Trump was not a fan of Mike Turner, who, especially on Ukraine funding and questioning of Russian propaganda, was under deep scrutiny from the eyes of Donald Trump. And so this is a moment here where I think Donald Trump, both men have acknowledged, is going to be the one to really set the mission for Capitol Hill Republicans. And they have left it in his hands to determine whether they go forward with one bill or 2 legislative packages. So right now, this is very much Donald Trump's Republican Party in Donald Trump's Washington. Yet at the same time, clearly both of these men want to work and cooperate with one another, but they need some direction here from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Ashley, you surfaced something yesterday that I believe it was Steve Bannon that I thought was really interesting. And this was the fact that we saw those tech billionaires behind Donald Trump. And this is not the tech billionaires walking into Washington with, power at their hands. This was, in fact, Donald Trump showing that he's brought them to heel. They were like heads on a platter. And I wonder, is that what we're seeing with the Republican Party as well? I mean, and you've been covering him for a long time, as I have. There's definitely a different flavor to just the beginning of this second round. The way that Donald Trump has felt emboldened, what he's done, the fact that he didn't pardon. He didn't selectively pardon people for January 6th. He pardoned everybody, even the most violent ones, even the ones convicted of seditious conspiracy. There is a certain sense of bulletproofness that Donald Trump is operating with. Like, he can do no wrong whatsoever, and everybody has to bend to his will. Is that how you saw yesterday's events? And if so, how do you anticipate the next 100 days are going to go?
I mean, that's exactly right. Katie, you and I covered him in 2016, and there was a sense when he won across the nation, even from his own party, that it was a fluke, that it was an aberration, that Democrats or people who didn't like Trump who stayed home or cast a protest vote, they did so because they didn't think he could actually ever win. This time, it is very clear that it is not a fluke. It is not an aberration, that people went to the polls for the first time in his 3 races. He He won the popular vote. He won all of the swing states. So yes, he is behaving. And you just saw that yesterday. He did not give, and to be clear, his American Carnage inaugural address was not what you would call a traditional inaugural address. But I was struck even more so this time. He's doing it the way he wants. He gave a sort of a mix between a rally rant and a State of the Union, where standing right next to outgoing President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, his opponent, he criticized their policies repeatedly, the America of theirs under the last 4 years. And I think we are going to see that embolden Trump. I mean, you mentioned all of those pardons he gave. For what it's worth, it doesn't actually poll that well. A lot of Americans, even Republicans, don't love the idea of all of those J6 pardons, especially for the violent offenders. But at least on day one, that was clearly not a concern for Trump. So yes, it was striking. When I was doing that piece on all of these sort of tech bros, the tech oligarchy coming to town, I sort of wondered if, some of these executives were begging for a seat or what the dynamic was. But one thing we learned that I was struck by, it was twofold. Mark Zuckerberg very much ingratiated himself with a group of Republican donors he would not have been comfortable with 8 years ago, to ask to host a party, to ask to have a seat at that elite MAGA table. And the flip side is Trump personally invited him and those other tech executives to be up on stage with him. And as Steve Bannon put it to me, and Steve Bannon knows Trump quite well. It's also worth noting he is not a fan of the technoligarchy. But he said, look, it's like walking into Teddy Roosevelt's game lodge and looking at all those stuffed heads on display. It was a power move for Trump. It was not necessarily a flex for all of these tech guys who have way more money than him, but are desperate for his approval.